So again, let's begin by imagining we're the thunder beings of the West creating a new energy, trying to find a new vision in the balance of light and darkness that always happens in this world. When a vision comes from the thunder beings of the West, it comes with terror like a thunderstorm. But when the storm of vision has passed, the world is greener and happier. For wherever the truth of vision comes upon the world, it is like a rain. Black elk. It is like a rain. Several thousands of years ago, something very unexpected happened in evolution. Almost like a freak development in the evolution of all living beings, all life. The explosion of the human neocortex. So evolution is at a steady curve. Everything is moving along and at its pace. And for some reason that all kinds of people have various theories about, something happened where the neocortex, the frontal lobes, developed at such a pace that we have a curve that veers away from the regular development in evolution, and it just goes up steep. Now we all know what that means, all these capacities of the human mind, the inventiveness, the ingeniousness, all the ideas that we developed over hundreds of years. And the big question that we are facing now, obviously, is, well, what about integrity? What about accountability? Are we really in tune with all these ingenious things that we can invent and all the powers that we have unleashed on this earth in technology, in research? Are we really capable of reining in these powers, controlling them, being accountable for them? That is a huge question that we're faced with. And I think all of us would agree that this is one of the major challenges in this world today, where we have to ask ourselves, well, is it always about let's do this because we can do it, simply because we can? Curiosity is one of the most beautiful features of human beings. However, if the curiosity leads us to a place where we just do things because we can, again and again and more, things get out of hand because accountability, integrity, and responsibility take a back seat. And in many of the things that we have invented and developed, that is obviously presenting humanity with a major challenge at this time. If we move over to the world's religions, most of the institutionalized religions in the world, and this is akin, it is sort of in the same pace with that development of the neocortex and all that thought and all the theories. Most of the institutionalized religions, they have built dogma, they have built structures that we are supposed to believe in. They have crafted systems of creed, of faith, and for most people it has led to a place where they actually feel a sense of disempowerment. So if we look back the last 2,000 years, the development of Christianity, the church, and so forth. So for the first couple of hundred years, there were the so-called Gnostics. They had their own spiritual practice in Christianity, their meditative, spiritual, deep explorations. And then the Pharisees and the scribes and the dogmatic people came along and basically said, well, we're going to have to put this into a system, and you guys are just doing your own thing here. And so that is what the church as an establishment was actually founded on, and everything became dogmatic. And the main development was that the priests and the ministers and the Pharisees and the scribes were put into place because they knew the right way how to have a spiritual experience. And so basically, people like us were disempowered. We were told that our own direct relationship to the divine, to goddess and God, or by whatever name we would like to call this, is not right. It's heretic. Now, we have to be aware of the consequences that this has had over hundreds of years on a very deep level. It has disempowered us from trusting our own visions, our own insight into the nature of reality, the truth of our emotions, our relationships with other people, our relationships to nature, and at the base of everything, our relationship to the divine. Along with this whole development, sacred rituals of all kinds were pronounced heretic, were pronounced the work of the devil. So if we go back about 500 years and we imagine the Spanish conquistadors coming over here in this and into the South Americas and finding these tribal people that were engaged in sacred rituals using sacred plants. At first, if we look at the codices that where they wrote this down, they described this in a very neutral way. But then very quickly they think this is the work of the devil and we have to persecute these people and bring them to the Lord, which meant, as we all know, major genocide in these parts of the world. So the church basically cooperated in creating a sense of regulated spirituality over hundreds of years, which brought us to a place where many of us don't really have a sense of what is the meaning of life, why am I here, what is my understanding of the divine, what do I really believe in, trust in. And I'm going to go back to a little bit of theology here. If we go into the original text of the Bible, the word is actually not belief or faith. The word is trust in the original language. That's quite a different deal. If I believe in something, or if I have faith in something, if I'm asked to believe in something, to have faith in something, it's usually more to do with something that I have not experienced necessarily, something that I haven't seen, something that I don't know if it's really true or not. Trust is an active step that I can take if I want to explore. So I trust my experience. I trust that there is something out there within and without, both at the same time, that I can explore, that I can actually experience. And then if I have an experience, then I can, again, take the step of trusting that and talking about it with my sacred community of seekers. But I'm not necessarily needing to depend on any of the dogmatic ways of phrasing these experiences. So the church declaring all these personal experiences and the direct connection to the divine as heretic, and prescribing certain forms of experiences that most of us shy away from or don't want to engage in anymore. What this development of the neocortex and the dogma in religion brought about is a mentality that could best be described as an oppressive and colonizing kind of mentality where I take advantage of my body, I exploit it, I take advantage of my fellow human beings, I take advantage of the earth, I try to spread all over the globe and try to make use of everything that I can make use of without really paying attention to to a natural alignment with nature, with my body, with my fellow human beings. So the dogma that the church created and the process of disempowering people and actually encouraging them to distrust their own personal experience has led to a kind of alienation that has brought about an epidemic's meaninglessness, depression, anxiety in this world, especially in the industrial nations. And so if we think about this part of the world, my own ancestors from my country of birth and from many other countries came here. Some came because of famines in their country. Some came because they didn't know a way to survive. But many came because of rumors, go there and you can get rich. And so a lot of people came here and they took advantage, they took the land, some of them at gunpoint, and chased away and killed the native peoples and got rich. And so, you know, the today's prevalent kind of motto still for the majority in the industrial nations of the world is power, status, and money. Supposedly, that makes us happy. Now, we all know that's delusional. It doesn't happen. But if we bring together what we talked about so far, then this is a precursor to this development. And if we then look, well, what effect did that have on mainstream medicine, the medical model, the psychiatric model? We see it's the same functionalistic kind of way of seeing humans, the human soul. The human soul to mainstream medicine and psychiatry is an apparatus that I can use, that I can influence by taking certain pharmaceutical medications. And there is no sense of a body, mind, soul connection, let alone the whole aspect of a connection to what we might call the divine, or any other word. So in a sense, and this is going to be very radical, and I know not all medical people think like that. There's a lot of good medical people, psychiatrists, that really try to break new ground. But the mainstream, if we talk about the mainstream, we can actually make a pretty radical statement. This reductionist view of the human being and the human soul is actually textbook schizophrenia. The word schizophrenia comes from Greek. Schizos is split, phren is the mind. So what does the mainstream medical system and psychiatry actually do with our souls? It says, well, if you have visions, if you have dreams that really move you and you want to change your life, you're probably psychotic. You're probably schizophrenic. You probably need some medication. Yeah? Now we all know sitting in this room together, we know how crazy that is. But if we all were to walk around and talk to the mainstream medical establishment and say this, they would probably diagnose us. A very interesting guy by the name of Alan Francis. He was called one of the major psychiatrists. A couple of years ago, he was called to collaborate on the DSM-5, the Diagnostic Manual of Diseases. And, they were bringing up all these new diagnoses, and then he said, this is it, I'm out. I'm not doing this. Because, when I get up in the morning, I may sometimes feel sad or depressed. In the afternoon, I may be giggly, I may laugh with my grandkids. Now, you're telling me all these things are moods that need to be treated. And so he wrote this book, Saving Normal. It's a wonderful book where this guy really just says, look, we cannot go on with this because the big pharma is going to reap huge profits if we do this. The diagnostic system in psychiatry and psychology and psychotherapy has sprung forth from mainstream medical understanding of who we are as human beings. There's a certain amount of merit in diagnosing people because a lot of people want to know, what do I have? I want to know if I'm in a condition, what do I have? And so I get a label, I get a diagnosis, and then maybe some of the health insurance companies are going to pay for the treatment. The delusional side of it is, if someone says to you, well, I have PTSD, then you're going to know they're going to be talking about some traumatic event that happened in their lives. And then you're going to know, okay, they may have bad dreams, they may wake up in the middle of the night, and they may be really frightened, and certain things may trigger them, and you got to be careful what you're saying because it might scare them. But the diagnosis is a label. It does not really do justice to the reality of this person's soul. And so sometimes we suggest to people to reframe that term and say, what you actually really have is PTSO, post-traumatic stress order, because your psyche is very smart and your soul is very healthy. It has a coping mechanism. So if something traumatic happened to you, it is going to, for a while, compartmentalize that particular event until you feel strong enough to work with this in a right setting, and then to heal it, and then to be free of these kinds of symptoms. So really what we are seeing in the diagnostic system and in mainstream psychiatry and medicine is actually a pretty deluded and superstitious idea of what the human soul is. Superstitious in the sense that to believe that only rational explanations of the human psyche and its functionality are the only valid way of understanding the human soul, that is unfounded. There is no proof for that. Quite the opposite. So in a sense, this reductionist view of the human soul is superstitious because it believes in something and is hooked on something that it defends aggressively against, for example, the insights of the native traditions and indigenous wisdom that we're going to get around to. So, of course, we all know about Big Pharma, the huge profits that Big Pharma reaps off of this whole system. Now, this is not to completely demonize pharmaceutical medication. There are many, many occurrences in our lives and lives of people we know where precisely a pharmaceutical medication has saved lives, has helped people to circumvent a suicidal ideation, a suicidal inclination that they have felt. But the crux of the matter is psychiatrists prescribe this stuff and prescribe it forever. And people get hooked on this stuff. They get dependent on it. They get scared to process the problems that they have felt, the emotions that they have felt that brought them to take these medications in the first place. So ideally, these things should be used for a couple of months, and then if a person feels strong enough, they should be accommodated. They should be brought into a safe setting where they can process what's behind their having to take these medications in the first place. So Big Pharma wants to avoid that, wants to prevent that from happening, to the point that about 35 years ago, when a supplement company selling natural supplements, plant-based things, herbs, was held at gunpoint by the DEA because they were trying to sell certain things, saying this could help better than some of the medication, and it's actually without side effects. So that's the situation we have gotten into. And if we understand what this whole development, which I've talked about in just a few words, much more could be said, obviously, where this has brought us as a species, you know, we have to. I'll bring in a joke from the Midwest, an old country joke from the Midwest. Okay, so old guy is getting to his old pickup truck, drives down a country road, and he blows a tire and lands in the ditch. Doesn't know what to do. Another guy comes by after a while, stops, and says to him, "Well, what are you doing? What's going on? You know, are you lost? You know?" And the old guy says, "I would be if I knew where I was going." So that, you know, why does humanity not have a sense of being lost? Because we do not know where we are going. We have lost that. Yeah. So this is a really interesting point in time that we live in. It's actually one of the most exciting points in time we could ever imagine, because it is in our power to decide whether we want to learn again how to trust our intuition and our personal way of worshiping or having faith or praying, or if we think of ourselves as atheists, to meditate, whatever the case may be. You know? So let's focus a little more on what is happening in the human brain. We have a network, an incredibly complex network in our brain and in our nervous system. If you think of a mushroom, mycelium, we're using the term mushroom actually for the fruiting body, but the mushroom mycelium is a couple inches underneath the forest floor. It's a system, a network system that, according to new research, we know collaborates not only with other mushroom mycelia, but also with roots of trees and so forth. The documentary Fantastic Fungi by Louis Schwartzberg makes that really clear. It's an incredibly riveting documentary. If you have a chance to see it, I recommend it. So why is it that certain mushrooms develop a spirit that affects us, that gives us vision or insight or understanding of who we are in a deeper sense, connection to the divine? It is because this network underneath the forest floor has a very, very direct similarity to our brain, to our nervous system. There's neurotransmitters floating around all the time. There's neurotransmitters floating around all the time underneath the forest floor. How come that this planet has over 200 species of these particular mushrooms that build this particular molecule that is almost identical to one of the main neurotransmitters of the human brain called serotonin? Something is going on here. What is that? Why is that? We don't know. So it is only 70 years, 65 years ago, that the first white person was allowed to one of the Mexican mushroom veladas with Maria Sabina, the shamaness. And this happened in 1957. And he published it in Life magazine back then, and it spread all over the world. People started cultivating these mushrooms, and the first person that was actually able to synthesize the active compound called psilocybin in the mushrooms was Albert Hofmann, the guy who discovered LSD. And so they try to synthesize it, and they bring it to Maria Sabina. And she says, "This is amazing. Now I can do the mushrooms all year long." And then they questioned the Western scientists questioned her and the tribal people. Why is there this spirit in these mushrooms? Because in the chemical analysis, they found the mushroom does not need this particular molecule for its physical growth, for building the fruiting body, for building the mycelium. So it's some additional given that apparently, for some reason, was there. And they were asking these scientific questions, and so the natives listen and they smile and they are kind of careful because they know these Western people are all coming from their head and their scientific understanding. And they ask the question again, and at some point the natives say to them, well, it's a very simple answer. So humans can see God. So in other words, it's a mystery. We don't know. We don't know. It's a mystery. So if we go back to the structure of the brain, neurotransmitters floating around, if we take into account all the things that we talked about before, the narrow-mindedness that we have gotten into as a species, think of this network as a system of roads. There's interstates, there's highways, there's country roads, there's gravel roads, and the development that we have taken in this world has led us to believe if I'm on the freeway and if I'm going 55 miles an hour, then I am right. Then everything is correct. If I take time to drive somewhere, if I go down a gravel road, if I stop, look at the vistas, I'm off. I'm not in the mainstream. Something's got to be wrong with me. So that's the situation we have gotten ourselves into. And the pharmaceutical drugs, they support that one-track mind. If somebody has a deep loss in their family and they feel grief, they are usually not allowed to grieve because people are scared by grief. So the grieving person is medicated. The whole thing is camouflaged, it's suppressed. And so for years and years, people have to take these medications because they're always afraid that the grief might come up, that they may sink into a black hole. So what I want to do here is and I know you know all this, and so I'm looking at this as let's bring this back to our awareness because it's so important and precious. The differentiation between drugs and medicines. Both can have a common denominator. They can expand consciousness and they can heal in some cases. But pharmaceutical drugs like antidepressants, for example, they create habituation. They do not help people process what they ideally should go through in terms of healing with the right kind of support. They create an artificial sense of happiness that is not based in their own inner relaxation, but it's based on the fact that they are suppressing something that seems unpleasant for them. Their long-term ingestion has very serious side effects: obesity, loss of libido, bone problems, all kinds of things that people go through if they take these things for too long a time. Also, these kinds of compounds are very directive. They only let you drive down the freeway. They will not let you explore the vistas of your consciousness. They block these vistas off. You can't go down a gravel road or go through a forest. You have to stay on the freeway. You have to stay functional. That's what they are there for. Now, in contrast to that, what we like to call medicines, these are plant medicines and substances that collaborate with us. There's an invitation coming from these medicines to understand on a deeper level who we are as human beings, to understand how to live better in alignment with our purpose on this earth, in alignment with our fellow human beings, with nature, and so forth. Now, what has been confused over many decades is that some of the things we should call drugs, because they create habituation and they harm our organs, they are consciousness expanding. Opium, cocaine, methamphetamine. And that's one common denominator they have with this other group of compounds that we like to call medicines. Some of the medicines can have very powerful consciousness expanding effects. And so, because of all the background that we talked about before, the functionalistic idea of what the human soul is, these things have been thrown together and they're all called drugs. They're not. Drugs are things that harm us, that create addiction, and that don't help us understand who we are, don't help us process what we ideally should process in our lives to learn. The medicines, things like psilocybin mushrooms, LSD, ayahuasca, MDMA, mescaline, many others, they also have very powerful consciousness expanding effects, but they leave us to be free, to integrate, to make our own decisions after the journeys that we take. They don't force us anywhere. They don't create addiction. They do not harm our bodies. They do not harm our minds. They help our bodies. There's so many stories of healing, and there's so much research out now that we can really put these two groups side by side and say, okay, here's really the difference. This is a very important distinction to make. And just one example, they did a study many years ago with ayahuasqueros and people who drink ayahuasca since childhood. For any of you that may not know what ayahuasca is, it's a visionary jungle drink that's used in South America with the tribal people. So they ran this study, and people who had been drinking this for decades, sometimes several times a week from childhood, and then they had a control group of people who had not drank ayahuasca or used any other kind of medicine. Now, in all cognitive and physiological parameters, these ayahuasca drinkers scored better. No addiction, no health issues, no cognitive decline, nothing. That can tell us a lot about medicines. Where we all want to go is a natural alignment with the purpose of this whole thing that's happening here on this planet. We can never fully know it with our minds. The mind is an instrument. If you have a bowl of soup, what are you going to get out? You're not going to get out a fork. That's not the right tool. You can't eat soup with a fork. You can't understand the mystery of this life with the mind only, but we can all understand it with the heart and with our spirit and our soul. So what we are really seeking, and this brings back the point of how do we build enough accountability for all the ingeniousness that we have developed in our rational mind. We are seeking for a natural hierarchy. The natural hierarchy is not mind over heart, mind over everything else. The natural hierarchy is actually the heart, soul and heart, over mind. The mind should ideally be the servant of the heart. Think about the first time you fell in love. We all remember it was super scary. We were all nervous. The mind was going crazy. Should I do this? Should I do that? But had we, for God's sakes, goddesses' sakes, had we had the skill to listen to our heart first, it would have been very simple. The heart would have said, yes, 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 right? And at some point, further down the road in our lives, the heart says, no, don't do this anymore. which is not really a no, it's actually a yes to ourselves. But the mind gets in the way, and it all gets really complicated, really confusing. So really what we want to find is realign ourselves with the purpose of who we are in this cosmos and learn how to serve this larger purpose, even though we can't fully understand it. But in our visions, in our meditations, in our spiritual practice, we get a pretty good and clear sense why we are here. We are here to serve this paradise in some kind of way. We are here to serve each other, to support each other in growing as human beings, like you are doing in this community, for example. This is all about growth. This is not about people having certain titles and letters behind their names and so forth. It's about coming together and supporting each other. And that's why I think this is a role model of what human beings can be. I want to zero in on a development in psychology. Psychoanalysis in the early 20s of last century said, well, it's all, we are born and then there's all this biographical imprint, and then we have certain amounts of trauma or this or that we bring, and then in psychoanalysis it can heal if we talk about it, and there's nothing but these biographical imprints. If I work through them, I'm going to be a free human being. So psychoanalysis focused on everything that was supposedly wrong with me. It would put me on a couch and I would free associate, and then psychoanalyst, would sit behind a couch and he would tell me, well, this and this and that, I note it down, and he would know where I am. He would know what my life was about. He would know where I was supposed to go, as if he or she would know my soul. Now, in the 1940s and 50s, a guy named Carl Rogers came along, and he founded what was called client-centered therapy. And he said, let me really listen to these people. I don't know this person. I really need to listen to understand them. Out of that later, I'm going to do this a little short so we don't all get tired. It's a lot of talk. Humanistic psychology in 1969, Abraham Maslow and a couple other, the hierarchy of needs and the psychology of being, and made a very radical statement. He said, well, we can dig around within forever. I'm always going to find something that's wrong, that I don't like about myself, that somebody else doesn't like about myself. I can always think, oh, I should work on this, I should somehow repair this. Really, people have more fear of their strengths, of their beauty, of what makes them dance, what makes them happy. We should strengthen that, because all the other stuff is going to come out by the side, by itself. So that was humanistic psychology and the whole growth movement. And only 7 years later, 1969, when all the Eastern teachers started coming in and the indigenous people started talking to us, people founded transpersonal psychology. The term meaning, finally we get to a point where we integrate these things that are beyond our ego, beyond who we always thought that we are. Transpersonal and humanistic psychology opened up a new understanding of trauma, depression, and addiction. Addiction used to be just something bad, a person that was doomed, basically. Depression was a diagnosis where somebody is just somehow genetically or sick or has some malfunction of the brain. Trauma was something that was repressed, that wasn't even talked about, wasn't even recognized. All of a sudden, with these deeper insights into the human soul that were brought about by Eastern teachers and the indigenous wisdom traditions, we began to understand that trauma is actually, or PTSD, the reaction to trauma, is actually a very healthy coping mechanism of the psyche that protects the person. Depression, the word meaning I'm pressing something down, is actually a tweaked or gone astray impulse to deny something that I would actually really like to express in my life and only don't have the privilege to do so. I can't learn it or couldn't. Addiction is actually a tweaked search for communion. Most people that are addicted to very serious substances are super creative, super intelligent, and most of all, super sensitive. They find it hard to cope with a world where power, status, money is being sold as the ways towards happiness. They don't buy that. But if they don't buy it, they're not going to have any money. And then they're going to be in danger. And some of them get addicted. And then for temporarily in their journey, they experience this sense of connection. But then they come back and they fall harder. That's why Bill Wilson and Carl Jung founded Alcoholics Anonymous, and Jung coined this phrase, spiritus contra spiritum, which means a spiritual experience is the only thing that can replace this spirit, in this case being alcohol, which temporarily suggests the delusional state of being in communion. So very, very precious development that prepared the path for all the work that we all are doing now and that we're so fascinated with. So what's the role that indigenous wisdom and sacred plants really play in all this? Well, as we opened the doors in the late 60s, the 70s, and the 80s, with a lot of chaos, obviously, but a lot of beauty and creativity too, a lot of music, there was a huge influx of these traditions into Western countries all over the world, especially, of course, North America. And it used to be turn on, tune in, drop out, the famous motto of Timothy Leary. But for us, over the last years, it actually shifted a little bit and it became turn on, tune in, and drop in into a better understanding of who we are, into a better understanding of our place on this planet, in this world, maybe even in this cosmos. And so the explosion of interest on every level, whether it's research, whether it's personal exploration, whether it's group healing sessions, whether it's meditation, the explosion of interest in all these sacred plants is actually something that reconnects us to the oldest spiritual insights of this species, of humanity. We know from rock paintings, from some old texts, from traditions, that before there was any institutionalized religion, even Buddhism or the Tibetan Bon religion, it all came from shamanism. It all came from exploration with expanded states of consciousness. In our case, we're talking about sacred plants. There's other methods. The method is only the boat to cross the river. It's actually secondary, but it is spectacular, the plants, because they work so fast and so efficiently. There's also dancing, there's fasting, there's yoga, breathing, there's all kinds of methods. But for our society where we have these fast lives, the medicines are especially interesting because they allow us to have the kind of life and honor where we are and still be able to partake of these divine experiences. Wherever we look in the world, we find texts, we find depictions, we find symbols of wholeness carved into the rocks, where it's very clear that people have undergone these shamanic experiences. That should lend some credibility to what we're doing. We can't, the whole thing has been criminalized since, 50, 60 years, give or take. What is this? What kind of hubris is this that goes back to the churches having declared this the work of the devil and then having become legislation? So thanks to the courage that we have in our hearts, each one of us makes a decision, very personal, to say, well, I'm going to look at this, and I'm going to find safe ways to explore this if I want to. And I'm not necessarily going to buy this legislation for what it is. I'm going to question it, and I'm going to try to work on it. This is what's happening in the research formats now. At every, maybe you've heard of MAPS, Multidisciplinary Association of Psychedelic Studies, Hefter Institute, Usona Institute, many studies going on all over the world where legally these things are explored to create scientific credibility for their effectiveness and their non-harm use. The deeper layer, which all these studies, as important as they are, cannot do justice to, is the most exciting thing about all this work, which I want to spend a few more minutes talking to you about. It's the deep correlation, the deep communion is the better word, that we can all experience when we go on a journey, on a plant medicine journey. A sense of being in deep communion with something that we could call divine. Whatever word we like to use, we prefer. Let's just agree to use the word divine now. A sense that there is a nourishing, intelligent, intentional wisdom out there that creates a mothering universe that has an unbelievable, intense, and endless love for us human beings. The experience in a plant journey that with all the faults that I have as a human being, with all the shortcomings that I have, I am welcome, not only by the divine, but if I be honest about who I am, my sisters and brothers are going to love me, and I'm going to love them back. And if I screw up as a human being, I can trust them to call me out on it without dismissing me in total as a human being. So I can trust that I can grow with them. So this is what these medicines can do. And there's what I like to call a reciprocity between the divine and us humans. So on some of the deep ayahuasca journeys or any other journeys that you may have undergone or meditations, there moments of fear arise. Yeah, and they can be so intense that I'm going to say to myself, what the hell is wrong with you? Why do you do something that scares the living daylights out of you? Why do you do that? And so over time, when we work with these intense inner states, whichever way they are brought about, we learn to be in communion. We learn to talk to the divine, or sometimes we hear the divine talk to us. Sometimes it's words, sometimes it's the way we hear a song, sometimes it's the way we see a bird fly that speaks to us, sometimes it's the movement of the trees and the winds. It speaks to us. And so we talk to the divine talks to us. And so we start negotiating, and we say, look, you don't have a body. I have this longing to be with you, and I know a lot needs to be purified and cleansed out of me to really be an uninhibited or unperturbed communication with you. But please cut me some slack. I got this body. This body feels fear. Yeah, I'm a human being. Your power is just so extraordinary. I don't know if I can hold this in this particular journey. Please cut me some slack here and let's do this together. And this has been something that with many, many people that we have had the privilege to be with has been a major, major helping tool. Because there really is a reciprocity between us humans and the divine in the sense that not only do we, at the depth of our soul, long for this divine connection and for feeling whole within ourselves and embedded in the larger whole in terms of a nourishing universe. The divine needs us. The divine needs us because we are in the body and we can share this amongst ourselves to learn how to honor this incredible paradise that we've been given, to honor this creation and to really make it into what this can be. People are fighting wars. People are going crazy all over the place. Imagine what this species can do. We not only thrive on being loved, being listened to, being appreciated, we actually even thrive on giving that to other people. It makes our hearts happy to give, to appreciate somebody, to love somebody, to express that love with words, with music, with whatever, with touch. Now, we have to think about what that means. It means a total and utter abundance in this existence. We can see it in every tree. So many seeds, every seed can do a tree. Now all this love that we have as a potential, all this appreciation, it can make this paradise happen. But what we need to learn is this accountability. What we need to learn is to look deep within ourselves to get there, to understand this. What we need to understand and learn, or can, I should say, it's our choice, is to understand this reciprocity between the divine and us humans. Not only do we need spirit, spirit also needs us. This is something that in spoken word is almost flat, because if it's not existentially understood, if it doesn't stand under us, it still remains a thing of the mind. It's a concept we can all understand together. We can talk about it. But it's almost worthless if we keep it at the level of the mind. It's eating soup with a fork. We can only fully appreciate it if we do our practice and really go to a level of depth where this promised experience becomes real for us. So what does that mean for this planet's inhabitants? That's a huge question. As we sit here tonight and we see all these things happening in the world and some historic shifts, it makes us sad, it makes us angry, but it also should tell us that we are at a crossroads. And so really, the old indigenous story about the young Native American apprentice who works with the medicine man and goes up on the mountain to get the vision and so forth, and comes back, gets another vision, and then finally has the big vision. And he comes back to the teepee of the Native American elder and he says, you know, Grandpa, I had the big vision. What was it, son? And you probably all heard this story. Well, I saw two wolves. One was a black wolf. He was angry and aggressive and he destroyed everything. And one was a white wolf. He was strong, he was powerful, and he was a protector. And I feel both those wolves inside of me. Who am I? Which one of these am I? And the elders, the medicine man said, well, you're actually both of them, but it depends on which one you feed, which one is going to grow, and which one you're going to be turning out to be in the end with your people. So it is our choice. If we choose methods that keep us believing in who we think we should be, if we get addicted to the ideologies that this world is promoting, if we fall prey to the dogma prescribing a certain form of worship and prayer and meditation, we may get lost. Many of us are very lost. The whole epidemic of depression, meaninglessness, addiction, it's a terror to the human species. The suicide rate is increasing and increasing. Why is that? Because of all these things. Because of all these things that we mentioned so far. The freeway is the only thing that counts. We are multifaceted beings like we will never fully know. but we can explore it. So the outlook for this planet's inhabitants, or if we want to make it even bigger, what's the purpose of this life and this universe? It's to understand who we are. Why is the spirit molecule psilocybin in that mushroom? The mushroom doesn't need it for its physical growth. Why do we have a soul? We don't need it for the body to exist. The body can breathe. There's a heartbeat. It functions. We can think. We can make money. We can drive a car. We can use words to talk. That's not all there is to it. There's more between heaven and earth than we will ever know. So should we give up and just stay functional and, have children and get our education, make money, and then go to our graves? Or don't we all feel inside this deep curiosity to find out who we really are? What is this for here? This whole thing is incredibly exciting. Let's think back on our lives. What has happened so far? All these decades, all these miracles, all these people that we love and have loved, all the people that have loved us, all these synchronicities that have happened in our lives, all the hurt and loss that we've experienced. We can get bitter over those things, but really they have a meaning. If we dare to explore, we will find meaning. All the scriptures say that. All the scriptures say it. Wherever we go, there is something to explore. And these plant medicines have a specific function in this whole process. They came here for a reason. There's a lot of dogmatic people that say, oh, you Westerners, you don't know what you're doing, you shouldn't mess with this, you don't know what you're doing. Well, let's find out about this. Yeah, I'm perfectly open to realizing, well, I shouldn't touch this, I shouldn't work with this, but I'm also open to understanding that the reason why these plants, medicines, and all these other beautiful medicines came to us with such force is because we can actually experience that they have a spirit, an intentionality. And I'm going to take it to one last further step here, which is really almost too much for our rational minds. When we journey, we can experience, and this is talking from the perspective of native peoples and the indigenous traditions, that each plant and each medicine has a particular spirit. This spirit has a longing to build a personal relationship with us as individuals. This relationship is very individual. It's different for each and every one person. We all have been placed in very particular positions in our lives. And we know the challenges of where we have been placed. And we also know the blessings. And we struggle with the challenges, and we're grateful for the blessings. The plant medicines and the other medicines, they support us in this. They clarify for us, you are welcome here. You have been put in this particular life situation for a very specific purpose. And if you are open to learning more about this, I will help you. I will make you feel welcome. I will make you feel loved. I will heal you. This doesn't mean that it's all going to be easy. It's the harder path than taking pharmaceuticals. But it's certainly promised and guaranteed in all the traditions that healing is possible if we open up to this. So the biggest challenge, if we ask, where's this humanity supposed to go, is we are, in our deepest soul, longing for this communion with the divine, the sense of wholeness being embedded in a nourishing universe. We long for this, we want this, whether we know it or not. We can have this if we are willing to open up to this possibility. So the purpose of this existence, in a sense, for each of one of us in a very individual way, and we may phrase this differently, is to go from the mind to the heart. We use all these words to explain this stuff. They never really get there. One of my Indian teachers said, well, words are only fingers pointing to the moon. They're never the moon themselves. All these plants on the earth, many of the leaves, many of the plants growing, contain consciousness expanding molecules. They were here first, before our words were there. Ayahuasca has a language, it talks. Psilocybin has a language, it talks. It's not our words necessarily all the time. This is a language that has so much more wisdom. We don't never have to trust one human being because we know a human being is limited, but we can trust the depth of our own experience. And that's what these plants can bring, and they can fulfill that longing that we all have as human beings at the depth of our soul to be in communion with the divine and to have a healthy and supportive and loving sister and brotherhood with our fellow human beings. Thank you.